A lot of people are coming in and they're asking, based on the weather that we've had, what is the condition of maybe some of my applied nitrogen? And so, really the industry in general over the last several years, almost weekly, whether it be, during planting season or during in-season potential nitrogen applications, or even in the winter, we talk about managing nitrogen. And so this year is really no different than any other year, but we just want to take a few minutes and just share, just kind of sharpen the sword, so to speak, as we start having conversations with growers. What are the best questions to ask to decide whether we have nitrogen where we want it, or we have potentially a scenario that we need to come in and adjust? And this is really a conversation that we have each year. This is just a quote that I took out of an article out of Ag Pro, Farm Journal Ag Pro, that I just read here last weekend. And it's really, managing nitrogen means supplying the difference between what the crop needs and the amount that the soil supplies, and doing it at the right time. And so we're out looking at crops, and depending on where we're at, I was talking to our regional agronomy manager in the south, and he's seeing tasseled corn. But for the most part, as we get further north, our crop development has been slow. In fact, there's a lot of situations where you may have growers that are still evaluating whether they need to replant. There may still be some crop getting put in. And so a lot of people are looking at making sure they get the crop established. So there's some growers today that are looking at, potentially nitrogen as being their next step, or a combination of a nitrogen application and a weed control application. In some situations, growers are just still trying to decide what type of a plant stand they're going to have if they leave it, or knowing that once it dries up, they need to replant it. So that really lengthens out our season when we get delayed in planting. Certainly those crop stages are delayed, which means maybe pre-plant or early season nitrogen that is applied needs to hold on longer to meet when the crop needs that. So if we look at this next slide, and this is one thing that when this came out from Fred Belo many years ago, I really clung to, because there's a lot of pieces in here. You can't break it down to just 7 wonders, but these would be the hubs of what we talk about. Under nitrogen, we could have several subtitles that we talk about as far as other nutrients. When the nitrogen gets put on, does the nitrogen get into the plant? But we know nitrogen is a big factor in managing. And is nitrogen as important as any other nutrient? It's equally as important. It's a balance of everything, but the reason nitrogen is probably up there is because it is one of our more elusive nutrients. And we continue to look at nitrogen and movement and different things like that. And the key right now today that I want to do is really make sure that we keep things simple. And so as we look at nitrogen, we've got some sampling here. Greg Urey, our regional agronomy manager from Southern Illinois and Missouri, shared some information with me yesterday, and we'll talk about that just briefly as well. But if a grower, or you as a grower, or you as a consultant or an agronomist or part of the 360 family, you look at a grower that comes in, or you look at a field, what are the top 10 questions that you need to be asking, that I ask myself every time I go into a field? What is it that I need to be asking when I want to try to understand or get down the right path of, do I have a nitrogen problem, or do I not have a nitrogen problem? So these are the 10 questions that I ask. I had about 30 of them yesterday that subtitled underneath these, but these are what I would probably call the top 10 things to either think about or to really ask yourself as you start looking at your fields or looking at growers' fields. This is really what we want to look at. So when was my nitrogen applied? When we ask that question, we're thinking about, okay, it's been just applied, so it really hasn't moved, or it's been applied for a long time and there's a possibility that it did move. It's really that conversion of taking something that's stable to unstable with the potential of loss or movement. Did I use a stabilizer with my application? And this probably more stems to maybe an anhydrous application, a product like N-Serve. And we'll look at that here just in a little bit as you start to evaluate what that might mean with your nitrogen. What has been the soil temperature over that period of time? I know here in Iowa, for instance, that soil temperature through the winter months maybe doesn't feel like it's been warmer, but the microbes are telling me that it's been warmer, and as I look back, it has been warmer over a period of time, and we're seeing that in a conversion period, or in a conversion of NH4 plus to NO3. How much precipitation have we received since the N application? Again, we can receive rainfall events, but if it's in a stable form, that's okay. If it's not in a stable form, then we need to start thinking about what that may or may not look like. What forms of N were applied on this field? How did you apply it? Where is it at in the profile? So you'll hear us talk a lot about placement and where is the nitrogen. As you start spending more time in the fields, you're not only going to wonder where it is from right to left, but you're going to wonder where it is from up to down. And where is it up to down during that time frame of when your crop wants to grab it? And we'll talk about that just a little bit. What types of soil does my farm contain? There's different CECs, there's different ability, there's lighter soils, there's coarser soil, there's heavier soils, there's ideal soils. Each of them create a different factor, from the ability for nitrogen to be lost very easily to the fact that we have tight soils with no oxygen and we have a very small root mass. And so all the, just remember our goal is to get applied nitrogen into the root zone when the plant needs it to produce yield, and not let that plant sit there and think, boy, if I'm missing something to be able to do what I've been designed to do. Is your soil, does your soil have adequate drainage? I think that's pretty self-explanatory. What are your OEM levels on the farm? And that really goes to soil supply. And what is your crop potential? Now, as I said a little bit earlier, I know many areas in the I-States and other parts of the Corn Belt. Spoke with Stephanie Smith a little bit yesterday, Greg Urey again, Matt Foes, Aaron, Larry, all those regional individuals. And there's areas that we're still trying to understand whether we have the crop established the way we need to, or do we need to reestablish the crop? And so some of these questions will get answered over a period of time. The thing is, where is your nitrogen today? We're in a field. I show that picture at the bottom. It's one that we use a lot. The bottom right is a field that was all one and done. And so in that case, if a grower was if you were to ask that grower, where is my nitrogen, you'd say it's all in the field today. The other quadrants, especially the bottom left, was a guy that said, you know what, I've got some of my nitrogen out there, but not all of it. If we're concurring back to what today is, and he's coming in with more nitrogen. So when I look at a field, number one, I want to know the answer to those top 10 questions that I have. And it's either going to be one of four things. It's lost, it's up in the air through denitrification, or it's pushed through the profile so far away that there is no hope. Now, I would tell you today, I don't believe that we can sit here and say that we've lost a ton of nitrogen. What I do believe is that we can say it has, in many cases, where we put on nitrogen up early, it's been moved to a position we're not incredibly comfortable with, or a percentage of it has been moved. And that's step number two. It's moved to a portion of what we've applied has moved to the lower part of the profile. I was amazed, and I'll show you here in just a little bit, at how quickly some of our fall anhydrous moved down to the 12 to 24 spot already, 30, 40 days ago. So this nitrogen to me becomes somewhat unreliable. Some of it's moved, maybe different forms. Some part of a form has moved, some has not. Number three is that it's close to the root system. It's available when the plant needs it. And that's a very good day for all of us when we start looking at nitrogen and nitrogen uptake. Or number four, you're sitting back and saying, you know what, I've only put a base approach down. I still have the UAN in the tank, or I have the urea in the fertilizer building, and I'm going to come back and evaluate this, and I'm going to apply it closer to rapid uptake. So this is really one of the four things that a grower is evaluating today as to where is his nitrogen. So this next picture to me is always a picture that kind of puts it in perspective. And this was created back when, you know, which we still do. We knife ammonia into the ground about 7 inches deep. There's reasons why we do that, or why we were doing that. We still do that. There's high-speed bars where we potentially keep it up higher, and there's reasons why we've done that. But you know, when we start looking at anhydrous ammonia applications that are done on 30-inch centers, or just different applications, the plant doesn't care at all how we applied it. What it cares about is that it's there when it needs it. And so we farm really in strips, and we look at different things. So when you're out testing and you're out looking at things, and you're digging up root systems, and you're looking at where's the majority of that root system going to be. And today, a lot of our root systems probably look similar to the one on the screen. In some cases, they're probably a little bit bigger depending on where we're at. It's down in Mississippi, of course, they're much, much bigger. But in some cases, that seed is still in the bag. And in some cases, the nitrogen that was designed to feed that seed is already in the ground. And so it's just managing those two things as we continue to move together with that. So this next slide is really where is, it kind of elaborates a little bit on where is that nitrogen. And so in some cases, it becomes very black and white in the fact that I either have nitrogen or I've lost my nitrogen. And talking to Greg Urey a little bit yesterday, and he's been pulling some cores, is that we really can't say to a great extent that we've lost a ton of nitrogen. But what he has told me through his testing is that it can file. And he is still, in some cases, in southern Illinois trying to establish the crop. So, you know, on these pictures here, we look at nitrate leaching loss down through the profile. We look at denitrification, which in some cases, some of these soils, I know we probably lost some nitrogen up. We look at the weather patterns that we've had. In the bottom right is a field from last year, and it's one that I look at a lot. And if you look at that closely enough, you can look, there's a left row kind of further up the screen that does not show the nitrogen deficiency. That was a split row between all up front and on the right, and the one on the left kind of further down there would be one that we came in and applied nitrogen in season with Y-drop. And so in this situation, it went through a time frame that we pushed it out of the way. We pushed it out of the way. The roots just could not get to it. The roots could not get to it. And eventually we've lost it. And the plant sitting there late season saying, I don't have enough nitrogen to finish what I want to do. And obviously the plant is telling us that. So the next one is a combination of things of being out of reach. The corn plant knows that corn plants within that field are missing things. And you can kind of see that target on the bottom. You know, if that X is directly the center of that corn plant, there is nitrogen within reach of that root system, and there's nitrogen outside of the reach of that root system. So if you look at the pictures on the right, this is a field last year that was applied with anhydrous at an angle, and we saw plants at V6 stage, which you see there, that was not fortunate enough to be planted over the anhydrous mark. And then we saw one at V7 that was planted right over top of it. So it just assures us, you know, where did we place the nitrogen? Where is the nitrogen in the profile? Now, this is a side-to-side application of anhydrous, but start thinking about depth and movement through the profile and just different things that go with this. This last slide is a corn plant that basically a very high percentage of the nitrogen that we were able to supply, or soil to supply to the root system to be able to yield. And so this is just trying to get more of that nitrogen that we apply into the root system more consistently. I'm a big guy for digging root pits. I love digging root pits. You guys are going to see a lot of root pits from 360 Yield Center because it's something that we need to get underground and understand where these root systems are if we're going to make nitrogen more efficient. As you'll see here, that big mass right underneath that root system, yep, you can see the orange paint highlights roots down through, but certainly a much lower density. And as we get down a foot it's just not as viable of an environment. You know, that's why a lot of us don't like to soil sample 12 to 24 because it gets tough. And if it's tough for the soil probe, it's fairly tough for a root system. And so a lot of that uptake is really favored within that top 14 inches of uptake. So you have seen this slide a lot. As you start looking at the crop, start looking at those fields that you want to evaluate. Obviously, we know it's going to be a little while, but we get some heat, this corn's going to take off. A lot of times we forget about the sulfur component of this, but sulfur obviously is very important as well. Just looking at what we're going to be coming up against. A lot of our corn is cold, it's slow to grow, but at some point we're going to get heat, and all of a sudden weeks are going to go by and the stuff's going to take off, and it's going to get into a rapid uptake stage, and just being prepared for that is going to be very, very important. So just something I want to think about here. So this is some testing that I did here back on the 10th of April, and I'm actually going to be going out to these fields here hopefully either today or tomorrow. I'd like to see it dry up just a little bit more, be easier to pull. But this is what we saw from fall anhydrous. So this was fall anhydrous that was applied in November, and it was 150 pounds of actual with no stabilizer. And so you'll see the black bars as far as 0 to 12. You'll see the red bars as the 12 to 24, and this is nitrate. This is a nitrate reading, and what we're seeing already on the 10th of April is an incredibly high amount of farmer applied nitrogen that's already 12 to 24. And so you can imagine I'm anxious to see what I'm going to find here in the next day or two in these fields as we now are sitting here almost, 40 to 50 days later. The crop is planted, but it's a very short corn. It's going through, and we've had a significant amount of rain events to continue to push this nitrogen. And part of this is the fact that we saw microbial activity throughout the fall, throughout the winter to a slow degree, and it just kept kind of picking at it as far as conversion throughout the entire winter, at least through a significant amount of time. And so if we look at this next slide, this is the NH4. So a lot of people would say, including myself for many years, would come back on the 10th of April and say, well, I still have what you don't understand, Jamie, is I still have a significant amount of that fall applied anhydrous in ammonium. 3, you're missing half of the boat. So we sent these into Midwest labs, which we should do. I mean, we need to understand this, and those are the reasons. So what you're seeing is that you can see just a small spike of only 4 pounds per acre right there in the knife track, but for the most part, everything at that point had been converted. So at this point, we're looking at I guess what we would characterize as an unstable product in NO3. So this is with stabilizer, and so this has NO3 and NO4 on here. And so a lot of people ask me if stabilizers work, and you can ask me that any day of the week, and there's certain stabilizers that I've been around for the last 15 years that I can validate that they work. Now, I've not been around all stabilizers, but I've been around a lot. So when we look at NO4 and NH4, which is ammonium, you're seeing a much higher amount of ammonium in that soil because we did build a barrier around there to protect that. But we're still coming in and seeing it in that time frame well before the crop was planted. Now, I was talking to Greg Urey just a little bit yesterday, and he was in some fields that were applied in southern Illinois on I believe the 19th of April, and he's been out testing it. And certainly he has a significant advantage because right then on the 19th of April, the injected anhydrous ammonia became ammonium, and through a lot of these rain events, it was able to hold on to its NH4. So when we start looking at answering have I lost nitrogen or have I not? Every field is very different. Every application is very different. And so we'll get to testing here in just a few minutes. So the one thing I wanted to put up, this is kind of the tale of two environments. Many of you have seen this. And so if we look at last year's results, we may sit back and say, you know what, I know we had loss events, I know we had movement events, but we still raised one heck of a crop. And we did not need to apply much more nitrogen process as we go into 2017. But if we see 2015, which was a very different year, we saw a significant advantage to more nitrogen. And what we saw in 2016 was a year of the soil supply. Mineralization is a keyword that we use. We're going to be different amounts of soil supply through organic manner, through residue, that's going to help feed the crop. It's always going to help supplement what farmers apply. And we can't always tell exactly what that's going to be, but I would tell you the trend is closer to probably on average 15 pounds per percent organic matter. Last year we saw in cases of 30 to 40 to 50 pounds of nitrogen per percent organic matter. Now I would tell you that is an outlier on the map compared to what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. So I think we want to make sure that we go back and don't base, our nitrogen thought process on last year's. Now we may have that again. We certainly cannot rule that, but I think we have to go back and realize that if we've lost nitrogen potentially, if it's been misplaced, to go back to kind of what we've known as far as what we're getting from organic matter. So the big question is what should I do right now? I'm a grower, I'm a consultant, I'm an agronomist. The question is, it's wet, I can't finish planting, I can't spray. Let's get on the conversation about nitrogen. So if, depending on where the crop stage is, this is how I process this. In many cases, right now, if your corn is just small or it's not planted yet, and you know that you have a strong enough, I would wait. The last thing we want to do is go out today and apply more nitrogen just because it gives us peace of mind. We don't know where it's at, the profile. We don't know, if we, quote, lost it, if we, quote, pushed it off. Let things dry up. Finish your planting. Get some weed control spraying done. And as we get dried up, start looking at what our plan is as we've gotten through more things and we've got this crop started. And so at that point, once we get this crop, maybe before, we can go out and we can start splitting up some of our fields. If we've got 20 cornfields, realizing that those 5 could represent other fields and we can kind of overlap them, but go into different parts of those fields. So you'll see the map there that I've got. I've got different parts of that farm that signify different things. I'm going to go out and I'm going to pull cores in those different areas, and I'm going to try to understand what my levels are within that field. While I'm out there, I can also evaluate what I think I have for a stand, how uniform that stand is, dig up a few plants. Is my root system white? Is it robust? Is it starting to be robust? Is it starting to grow? And just realize what the potential is for the need for nitrogen. Now on this thing, I've also talked a little bit about coming out of organic manner. Typically, it's 10 to 30 pounds of release per percent that we want to take into the consideration. Probably the most common number we use just year in, year out is 15, knowing that that can move slightly. So we go out into these fields and we really want to measure 0 to 12 and 12 to 24. I realize really go down to 12 to 24 until the corn gets knee tall, because it shouldn't be down there. We know the roots aren't down there. But the thing is if we're trying to understand where our nitrogen is and how it moves, we need to have a benchmark throughout the growing season of, okay, is my 0 to 12 going down? Is my 12 to 24 going up? And where is my root systems? So whether you use 360 soil scan or whether you use a lab, I use both at times. I like to get ammonium samples, which we send to Midwest Labs, because I know the fields that I'm going in. I've already sent in samples. I know for the most part that conversion process has already happened on that fall anhydrous, and so I'm going to be using. So the biggest thing is when you're doing this, just try to understand what you're trying to come up with and where it is. The biggest thing is when you go out and you start looking at this, the question is, how are you going to pull these cores? And you need to understand how the nitrogen was applied. If it was applied in a band, then you need to make sure you're in and out of that band. And another good thing to know is when you're looking at this is, where is that band in consideration to the corn plant? And you know, these are things that as you go through 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, I think we'll just continue to evolve in how we apply nitrogen, how we measure nitrogen, how we make sure that farmer applied nitrogen to the plant. So you'll go out, or I'll go out, and we'll look at this. We'll pull a core. We'll bring it in. These are just some screenshots from earlier. Obviously, you'll see it's at VE. Love to get these final tests closer to actually application. So V3, V4, or V6. Take those last shots. We can utilize our N calculator to help us make that decision. If you're sending them to labs, you guys can, you know, they will help give you suggestions as well. These are be able to do this. So the one thing that I would tell you is the way a lot of people ask me, how do I adjust for 0 to 12 nitrogen versus 12 to 24 nitrogen? So if I'm pulling cores and I'm getting so much in the 0 to 12, I'm getting so much in the 12 to 24. And I dig up the root mass, and we obviously know we're going to have more potentially uptakeable roots in the top on the 12 to 24. There's times where, you know, this result right here says I need 144 pounds of nitrogen. Well, we may take the bottom 12, the 12 to 24, and there, we may see that there's 80 pounds of nitrogen there. So do we take 144 or minus 80, and that's what we apply? And I would tell you that I would be cautious to take all of the nitrogen that we're getting out of the 12 to 24. If it's, quote, 80 pounds per acre, depending on digging up that root, the soil type, what we think we're going to get penetration. A lot of times I'll take 50 to 70% of that nitrogen. So if it's 80%, 80 pounds, I may say, you know what, I believe I can grab 40 of that or maybe 50 of that. But to just make an assessment that I'm going to get that all is probably not being fair to your corn plant. So it gives you the ability to start thinking about what those recommendations are. The nice thing about the soil scan manner. And so that organic manner, well, over time, this program will know that you're probably catching some of that organic manner. So instead of giving you that over a period of time, we're going to start reading that on our soil scans. And so it helps us make that recommendation in time as we go through that. And like I said, soil scan's an option. Certainly labs are an option. Just managing and measuring is just, that's really what we're trying to do. So last slide here. As we evaluate the crop here today, I would encourage you to not focus on what is lost. I would encourage you to focus on what you need to finish the race. We want to talk about loss, and we want to guess what loss would be, or my soils don't lose, or what we're at. But it's not really about what we've lost. It's about go out at V3 or V4, and you start looking at these fields. You're sending in samples. You're going to start measuring up what the soil is going to supply you to finish this race. You're going to know, and then you're going to start to make the assessment of what are my crop demands. And then you're going to have the opportunity to come up with recommendations to basically bridge that gap and come and make an application. The thing I would tell you as agronomist consultants and growers is continue to think about those corn plants within that field. The variability that we see from one side of the field, even with just halfway across, would really require, in an ideal world, a different nitrogen rate. And so as you may go out this year and make a recommendation that is a flat rate all the way across the field, back and forth, the planter, and you're thinking about, should I be variable rate planting? Start thinking about, should I be variable rating nitrogen? As you move into 2018, 2019, advances that we're going to see on bringing up yields is managing it by the acre, by the soil types, by the zones. But for today, about a half an hour since we started. Thank you very much for coming on to the webinar today. With that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much, and have a great day.